Let's take a look at ethnography and how anthropologists go about studying a culture. Prior to the 1970s, anthropologists typically aimed to work in exotic, faraway places in order to document the most pronounced cultural differences. Today, cultural anthropologists are much more aware of the research potential of and insights about humanity to be gained from closer-to-home field settings. Advertising executive, factory workers, or transnational immigrants and an anthropologist's home country are equally important subjects of anthropological inquiry. What is so distinctive about anthropological fieldwork? Anthropology is generally less well known than other social sciences like psychology, economics, or political science. This creates a lot of popular misunderstanding about what anthropologists do in the field. Cultural anthropologists do research by building personal relationships over a long period, and it's a difficult process to prepare for in advance of the actual experience, especially working among people who may be culturally very different. It's nearly impossible to anticipate every challenge that will be faced during the course of ethnographic fieldwork. Anthropologists must learn to expect the unexpected, or at least be flexible enough to adapt to unexpected circumstances when they inevitably arise. Anthropologists often use qualitative data comparable to other social sciences, but cultural anthropology is the most qualitative of the social sciences. Two additional features distinguish anthropology from other disciplines. Anthropologists are more holistic, traditionally studying all aspects of a social life simultaneously. In anthropology, long-term immersion and participation in a community, at least a year or more, and the application of open-minded cultural relativism yields insights that would be thwarted by preconceived ideas. This long-term immersion is called fieldwork, and it is the defining methodology of cultural anthropology. It allows insights that would never be possible with short visits, surveys, or brief interviews. By personally participating in community activities, ethnographers observe what community members consider important, what they discuss among themselves, and how these matters intertwine with social institutions. This approach can yield an understanding of culture and behaviors that people themselves might not even be aware of. Participant observation is a key element of anthropological fieldwork, the standard research method used by social cultural anthropologists that require the researcher to live in the community he or she is studying to observe and participate in day-to-day activities. Participant observation can be thought of as a disciplined hanging out because anthropologists observe and take part in events rather than coordinating or directing them, and disciplined because anthropologists methodically record their observations and experiences while building rapport with community members. Establishing rapport as a professional stranger requires a lot of discipline as well as acceptance of local customs and practices, however peculiar, unfamiliar, or uncomfortable. Field anthropologists also rely on interviews, any systematic conversation with an informant, to collect field research data, ranging from a highly structured set of questions to the most open-ended ones. So how do anthropologists know what questions to ask? Between the 1870s and 1950s, many British and American anthropologists used notes and queries published by the British Association for the Advancement of Sciences in 1874. As a source of standardized research questions, this book was designed to help colonial-era travelers gather consistent data for armchair anthropologists who rely on the reports and accounts of others rather than original field research. As anthropology developed in the early 1900s, such standard guides became less relevant since anthropologists were personally collecting data in the field. Today, anthropologists no longer have a prescribed set of good general questions. Anthropologists usually have specific questions in mind based on their theoretical backgrounds and research focus, and questions frequently change during fieldwork as new cultural realities present themselves. The goal of insightful cultural questions is to get people talking. The more individuals talk and the more rapport that is built up, the more people tell us about the cultural logic of their daily lives, ways of viewing the world that they may not even be aware of. Most importantly, these observations and interviews must be recorded in some manner, most often field notes. Field notes are essential since details can easily be forgotten after months and years of having passed. Anthropologists also often record head notes, the mental notes an anthropologist makes while in the field, which may or may not end up in formal field notes or journals. Long-term field work and detailed field notes lead to a profoundly better understanding of human cultures, but they are no guarantee against bias and ethnocentrism. As outsiders, many of the behaviors anthropologists observe may seem paradoxical. But if we earnestly seek to see things in terms of local context, things that people say and do begin to make cultural sense. We begin to see the world from an emic or insider's perspective. Famed anthropologist Branislaw Malinowski referred to this perspective as the native's point of view, and asserted that it was the heart of ethnographic method. Most people assume that their own way of doing things is inherently better than everyone else's. Even anthropologists are subject to cultural tunnel vision, unquestioned tacit meanings and perspectives drawn from our own culture that prevents us from seeing and thinking in terms of another culture's tacit meanings and perspectives. Tunnel vision is not unique to Europeans and Americans. Everyone has a tendency toward ethnocentrism. Informants feel that their way of doing things, their moral, ethical, and legal codes, and their ways of thinking about the world are correct, while everyone else's are flawed. They have their own tunnel vision. Participant observation and open-ended interviews are the basis of cultural anthropological fieldwork, but the sheer complexity of human culture requires additional strategies: the comparative method, the genealogical method, life history, ethnohistory, rapid appraisals, action research, anthropology at a distance, and analyzing secondary materials. As important as first-hand fieldwork is to cultural anthropology, much can be learned from secondary materials. Any data that comes from secondary sources, such as a census, regional survey, historical reports, and other researchers. What special challenges do anthropologists working in their own societies face? Anthropologists working at home experience both the benefits and the drawbacks of familiarity. They are familiar with language and customs, but this familiarity has the potential to blind them to patterns obvious to an outsider. What special ethical dilemmas do ethnographers face? All anthropologists face common ethical dilemmas: the commitment to do no harm, considerations about to whom anthropologists are responsible, and who should control anthropological findings. In order to do no harm, anthropologists must use pseudonyms for informants in published accounts and make every effort to conceal identities. Unlike journalists, anthropologists in the United States have no First Amendment protections. Anthropologists are obligated to protect their informants, but field data are subject to a subpoena from the court in criminal investigations. This raises the question of who should have access to field notes. Most anthropologists view field notes as too private for publication, except in carefully edited excerpts. It is questionable whether field notes should be made available to informant communities. On the one hand, the data belongs to the informants. On the other, they may contain details that individuals do not want publicly exposed. Conducting ethnographic research during wartime can result in a conflict of interest. Are anthropologists obligated to their informants, their government, or both? During World War II, many anthropologists assisted in the war effort. More recently, the embedding of social scientists with combat units in the U.S. war in Iraq and Afghanistan has created an ethical controversy. Some anthropologists argue that Americans, anthropologists or not, have a moral obligation to help fight terrorism. The American Anthropological Association officially condemned the Human Terrain System program, arguing that anthropologists might be faced to take sides in trying to balance their military and anthropological responsibilities, and perhaps even damage the reputation of anthropology worldwide. In conclusion, participant observation provides rich insights that other social sciences cannot provide, specifically because it emphasizes a holistic perspective, direct experience, long-term participation in people's lives, and responsiveness to unexpected events. Anthropologists listen to the stories of their informants and understand their culture through them. All of the other methods that anthropologists use are in service to the insights that participant observation can provide, but where long-term residence in a community is impossible.